In the beginning, there were consoles. Blocks consisting of wires wrapped within a shell of plastic, only capable of playing games within the confines of a structure powered by electricity. The outlet acted as a gateway to the ultimate imaginative experience. Until Nintendo said, "Let there be green." And in the year 1989, a man by the name of Yokai willed into existence the Game Boy. With the ability to produce non-stop action until your AA batteries ran out of juice, no longer were you forced to play video games in your room. I mean, you were going to anyway. What are you going to do, play it outside? Not without a backlight, you aren't. What about the Game & Watch? Hey y'all, BLE here. Since the 1980s, Nintendo has dominated the handheld market. While console-wise, they've always faced fierce competition from Sony, Sega, and on a bad day, Microsoft, Nintendo's chokehold on the market cannot be understated. No company has gotten even close to overthrowing Nintendo. Some may bring up how the PSP is the 11th highest-selling console of all time, but you know what was the 10th? The Game Boy Advance. The 4th? The Game Boy/Game Boy Color. The 3rd? The Nintendo Switch. And what's the 2nd, you ask? Only the Nintendo DS, its direct competition. It outsold the PSP by at least 72 million units. And let's not even start on the PS Vita. The point is, Nintendo's handhelds are a force to be reckoned with. Let's say you buy a 3DS and, shock of shocks, you only have $10 left in your bank account. Well, first of all, that's not very smart. Face raiders won't pay the bills. Second, I'm glad you came to my channel, because today I will be talking about the cheapest Nintendo handheld games. Rules apply in order to qualify. All prices are from GamePriceChart.com and were recorded as of January 20th, 2023. All games will be judged on their price loose. Only the original release will count. All variants will be disregarded. No sports games, unless they're unique or rated high enough for a pass. This is to prevent Madden, NBA, or any old sports collection to win any of my qualifiers. Games will need to score a consistent 7 out of 10, or the equivalent, to qualify. Licensed games, on the other hand, must score an 8 out of 10 on average to qualify, meaning the game will need an abundance of quality to qualify. Finally, no repeats. If I've talked about a game on a previous episode, it gets skipped. Alright everyone, get your DS stylus ready, and where'd it go? I just had it! Oh come on, where could it have gone? Now how am I supposed to play touchscreen games? With my finger? Nah, that'll mess up the screen. The Game Boy is one of the most influential consoles in existence. Its beautiful gray brick design is recognizable even through silhouette, but this video was a pain in the ass to make. You see, high-selling consoles tend to have one thing in common. To get big, you need to be accessible to the masses instead of just gamers. And the PS2 also acted as a cheap DVD player, which helped cement it in being the highest-selling console of all time. You're telling me I can watch my favorite movies on the same device that plays Shadow of the Colossus, Final Fantasy X, God of War, or Ratchet & Clank? That's a selling point that'll get you 155 million sales, along with a few weird accusations. But let's be real, the masses aren't known for their ability to buy a good game. That's how Wii Play is the 28th best-selling game of all time. If a console leads a generation, you can be sure as hell to expect tons of worthless shovelware to plague its library. And folks, once again, like the Wii and PS2, I had to shovel through a ton of crap games to get to the ones that qualify. But first, let's take a gander at the cheapest game for the Game Boy, Super RC Pro-Am. A racing game for the original Game Boy, where one plays as RC cars on a track, attempting to avoid oil slicks, opposing cars, and a mental breakdown, having to hear the loud droning chiptune of your engine. According to critics, it was good, so good that the cheapest game is the Player's Choice Edition for $2.12. Well, this is a Player's Choice variation. The game doesn't quite qualify. Before we get to the game that does, let's hit some honorable mentions. Word Zap. I couldn't find a single critic that reviewed it, and after seeing the gameplay, I doubt it would have qualified. Motocross Maniacs. 1. Sports game. 2. Not enough reviews. And now for the moment you've all been waiting for. The cheapest game that qualifies. For $5.66, you get control of the curviest woman in gaming, which is of course Miss Pac-Man. Get it? She's a circle. Eh? Fun fact, she's probably Namco's least favorite character of all time. This is due to the fact that she's not technically a Namco character, but a GCC character, a team of people that essentially modded quality of life changes to arcade games. Before this segment gets too long, the reason Namco hates her is because of clever wording on the rights contract, stating that GCC would get royalties for Miss Pac-Man in each commercial setting. meaning every arcade re-release and console port made has to have some of the earnings go to GCC. If you're interested in why Miss Pac-Man has seemingly fallen off the face of the earth, there are plenty of interesting videos I'd recommend you watch after this. Weird that this is the second time this game has shown up on my show, but this isn't just any old Miss Pac-Man game. The first time we saw this game on my show, we glanced over it on the Xbox video. Now, we get the neutered Game Boy version. As you can see from the gameplay, the ghosts, instead of being their iconic colors, are all red or gray depending on if your Game Boy has color. But that's all aesthetic. The biggest problem with this version is the fact that to prevent sprites from being ridiculously small, they had to zoom in on the maze. Meaning that if you miss some dots in a random corner, you'll have to traverse aimlessly throughout the maze and hope you don't end up sandwiched between two spirits. Also, I swear I've never had this much trouble turning in a Miss Pac-Man game. You have to press on the D-pad stupid hard if you wish to make a corner. The number of times my movement was brought to a screeching halt because I didn't shatter my arrow keys was far too many to count. I'd throw a couple bucks at it, but $6? At that point, I just searched for a Namco collection. My recommendation for your Miss Pac-Man fix would be the Namco 50th Anniversary Collection, which will likely go for less than $10 online. Now granted, reviews weren't exactly stellar for this title, but that's mostly attributed to the fact that it lacks content. Yeah, if I spent $60 on a handful of 80s arcade games, I'd feel a bit gypped. The emulation for the most part was praised. Plus, hey, there's always, the E word. Emulation. Is it the best way to play Miss Pac-Man? Not by a long shot. Is it an okay way to play it? I guess if you only have a Game Boy, it's not an awful port by any means. Thanks to the Game Boy Color, we have games like Shantae, Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal, along with Grand Theft Auto. Ew, never mind. Not a bad library for a console with a lifespan of 3 years. But of all those classics, which game is the very cheapest? Why, a basketball game, of course. NBA In the Zone 2000 is a game that poses the question, what if the figures on the men's bathroom sign wanted to play basketball? And according to IGN, and IGN only, it's not fun. Which probably explains why it's $1.60. But let's get real. NBA? I mean, big, muscular, tall dudes all chasing after balls. Doesn't that sound kinda gay? But do you know what sport is the opposite of gay? One that's being playing guitar, and extreme BMX. For just about $5, you can play Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX on the Game Boy Color. And for a little extra, you can play the superior PlayStation 1 version. In the 90s and early 2000s, there's a bit of an obsession with extreme sports. The most memorable game from this era was the Tony Hawk series. Who knows how many franchises are attached to his name at this point? Pro Skater, Underground, Shred Session, Vert. Then you have Dave Mirra, whose games were well received but failed to ever gain the same attention as Tony Hawk. Well, all games except BMXXXX, which is debatably a Dave Mirra game. And if you want to learn more, Wha Happun has an episode on that. Although most might find it odd that a game made from much superior software would end up on such an inferior running console, it doesn't take long to understand why these ports were made. Moving on, how do I like the game? Well, I'm sure you could have guessed by now that my verdict is not to buy it. I mean, it's a fine game, sure, but fine in the sense that it's meant for a PlayStation, on a console with 6 fewer buttons and way less graphical capability. It's not even like Resident Evil Gaiden, where they found a creative new way to play the game. It's the same game for $1 less. Unless you want to play as an 8-bit angry video game nerd riding a bike,
Ass!
I suggest you skip the game. How could you acclaim? You promised these kids Dave Mirra, but all I saw out there was Chibi the Cheapskate. Also, for honorable mentions, Babe and Friends. Sure, it's a licensed game, but for a game based on a movie like Babe, the review scores are surprisingly high. Just not quite high enough. Finally, there's Pro Pool. Personally, I prefer Pocket Pool. It got rejected from the qualifiers, given the fact that it's pretty much just an average sports game. Of course, some may criticize my inclusion of Dave Mirra, because that's technically a sports game. If that's the case, let's see the next qualifier. Oh.
Virtual Boy. See it now in 3D.
Before you criticize me by saying that the Virtual Boy came out for the Game Boy Color...
Shut up, bitch!
As for the rest of you, the cheapest game on the console is Jack Bros. No, I'm kidding. It's Mario Tennis, which may also qualify if it didn't get such a mixed reception from so few outlets, which is surprising from a Mario game. Not the mixed reception, I'm talking more about the lack of anyone talking about it. Goes to show how much of a bomb the Virtual Boy was. Technically, the cheapest game on the Game Boy Advance is the Air Hockey e-reader card. The Game Boy Advance e-reader was a little accessory that, with the scanning of a card, you could play little mini-games or unlock little rewards. Some let you play NES games, and others, for example, compete in bonus battles in Ruby and Sapphire. In a sense, they're the primitive version of an amiibo. This e-reader, well, lets you play air hockey. That's it, you play as a dot hitting other dots. The reason I'm not counting this as the cheapest game comes down to the fact that an accessory is required to play this. The accessory required to play this will put you down about 30 bones, which is, spoilers, way more expensive than the cheapest game that doesn't require an accessory, Cabela's Sportsman Pack. For $1.05, you can pick this game up, which looks like a real shit piece. There's not a whole lot $1.05 will pay for in this economy, but I suggest you save your money anyway. Now for some honorable mentions, and trust me, there are plenty. SpongeBob SquarePants Revenge of the Flying Dutchman. Honestly, the game got decent reviews, just not good enough for a licensed game to make it. Sudoku Fever, for not having enough trustworthy reviews. This is understandable. If game journalists have trouble playing through the Cuphead tutorial, or listening to Persona 5 lyrics, I can't imagine they're fantastic at Sudoku. Evergirl is on here for lack of reliable reviews. From the footage I've seen, it's a minigame collection made for girls by girls. Oh, wait, never mind. Finally, Lego Island 2 Brixter's Revenge, not enough reviews. Finally, we get to the game that qualifies, a game based on a Disney sitcom named Phil of the Future. Ever heard of it? Because I didn't before the making of this video. From what I've gathered, it's about a time-traveling family who, while going through time, end up in the year 2004. I don't know what their end goal was, but I like to imagine it was to warn us about Hurricane Katrina. The time machine breaks and they're nowhere near New Orleans, so they decide to fit in with the rest of the people of 2004. Also, Phil is a caveman friend. The show got a decent score and managed to get 2 seasons, so you know what that means, licensed tie-in game. Now this one's a bit of a stretch, as my sources for the reviews for this are GameSpot's user score, which gave it a 7.7, one random website, which gave it an 80 out of 100, and another, which gave it a 90%, meaning, I guess it counts. Phil of the Future for Game Boy Advance is a 2D puzzle platformer that occasionally implements minigames. The story has you play as Phil, Curtis the Caveman, and love interest Keely. Yes, Keely. As the 3 of you attempt to defeat the GBA, a group of creatures that were intended to reduce stress, but if used in excess will put you in a state of non-stop apathy. So let's address the elephant in the room. Is this game great for people who don't know the series? Speaking from experience, I have one word: no. I have 0 ideas for how this hit such high critical scores. Like playing the first level was nothing but a slog, and looking through the footage online, the rest of the game looks pretty similar. My problems range from the fact that Curtis, unlike Phil and Keely, has no way to defend himself from attacks. Phil has the ability to kill them, and Keely has the ability to distract them with music. Curtis, on the other hand, is left to just jump over the GBA, which wouldn't be awful if not for the fact you can't switch characters on the fly. You need to be at a checkpoint to switch your character. This game has a tendency to use leaps of faith, which can result in your character taking unfair damage. The jumping in this game also felt really stiff, making Curtis feel horrendous to play, given the fact that that's the only thing he can do against the GBA. Add to the fact that this game has some janky hit detection, and I'm left befuddled by these scores. Don't buy this game. Even if you're a fan of the show, just don't. It's $3.99, which is as much as Wallpaper Engine is on Steam. So if you're dying to spend that money, just spend it on that. Maybe the reason Phil's family traveled back in time was to prevent this game from being made. If only their mission was successful. And if you want to be an asshole about it, the cheapest non-licensed game would be... The cheapest game for the Nintendo DS is a game called, and apologies if I butcher the title, Hite Utairu Guitar Sessions M06. Looking at this cover, I'm suddenly reminded of every Extend Extra, just for how cool it looks. It reminds me of Death Note, with the apple that's been bitten into, and the muted, almost gothic aesthetic, the way the light hits the apple, and you can follow where it disappears. It's so enticing. One cannot help but be curious on the gameplay.
So if you want to strum light, you strum light, and it makes a different sense. If you want to strum backwards,
Yeah, this is the Japanese cover for Jam Sessions, which, for some reason, is the cheapest game in America. Probably a glitch on video game price charts end, but nevertheless interesting. I will say, this game is one of my favorite commercials of all time. Nothing brings my spirits up more than watching a young Max Mofo yell, "Fucking sponge cake!" If fantastic commercials helped you qualify, this game would far surpass the competition. Unfortunately, it didn't resonate with critics, so we move on to the next game. After traversing through hours of crappy licensed games, minigame collections, and shit made by no-name studios, I happen to stumble upon the game that qualifies. Jam Sessions 2. Guys, I'm gonna reveal a deep dark secret. You'll have to promise that you won't make fun of me. Ready? I'm awful at rhythm games. I don't mean I'm bad. I mean absolutely dreadful. Like Helen Keller given 15 minutes would do better at Guitar Hero than me given a year of prep time. Do you guys want to hear a story? When I was a young lad, 15, I played Shrek 2 on the GameCube. I was having a fun time with various Shrekscapades, until I reached the first boss, Puss in Boots. Puss's Fight is a rhythm game, and a tough one at that. Tough for the targeted demographic, that is. A 15-year-old should get past it easy. But lo and behold, due to my lack of rhythm game skill, there I was, screaming at Shrek 2 for GameCube over the course of an hour, until no shit, my mom told me to calm down. Shrek 2 for the GameCube made me sound like a COD player, all because it had a rhythm game. Do you want further evidence I suck? Well, here's some footage of me playing. Guys, do not ask me for my opinion on rhythm games. I recommend just searching for another review if you want to buy it. The very cheapest game on the 3DS is Skylanders Trap Wars. As I've explained in other videos, I don't count these toys to life games. Mostly because, in order to play the game as intended, you need a good... Hi, Chancho. Mostly because, in order to play the game as intended, you need a good collection of figures. Figures cost money. Probably more money than the real cheapest game. I'm shocked this game ended up being the cheapest. You're telling me something with this box art wasn't at least nominated Game of the Year? The first year of a console's lifespan is the perfect time to release the worst shovelware. People will be so desperate for a reason to justify their $300 to $600 purchase that they will buy literally anything that'll occupy their time. Sure, most consoles will release 1 to 2 promising launch titles in order to entice people into buying the hardware. The initial launch titles for this console were lacking. Most of the recognizable names were either remasters or games too underground to draw a huge crowd. So, it shouldn't surprise anyone that this game was made within the first year of release. What should surprise you is that the company behind the game isn't some throwaway studio. Renegade Kid is a decently known indie studio with a few great games under their belt. Mutant Mudds is their most famous game in their collection, but they're far from one-hit wonders. Does that mean this game has a possibility of qualifying despite its awful cover? Nope. The game, in fact, does suck. Sometimes you want to judge a book by its cover. Moving on to the game that qualifies, Sushi Striker: The Way of Sushido is an action puzzle game made by Indie Zero and published by Nintendo. You control a little ninja boy, or girl, who matches the plate colors on a sushi belt. The larger the number of plates you combine, the more damage you do to your opponent. If you want more info on the game, tough. The plot section on Wikipedia contains almost 1,000 words, along with a little note. And I already have a verdict for you. Don't buy this game. On the same day it came out on 3DS, it came out on the Switch, which no doubt runs and looks better. Right now on Switch, the game costs about $6, and would still qualify as the cheapest game. Now, should you buy the Switch version for $6? That, I'll leave up to you. If action puzzle games with an anime aesthetic are your cup of tea, then you'll be happy to know this got some good reviews, but it's nowhere near a must-play Switch game. I will say though, with the opening line of the plot being, the game takes place in a world without fish, where the Republic and the Empire have long battled over control of sushi in a war known as the Sushi Struggles, I wouldn't blame you for being curious. This video was doomed from the beginning. Handheld gaming is appealing for its mobility and is infamous for having lower quality ports as opposed to home consoles. It was only inevitable that the cheapest game on these consoles would just be ports of games from better hardware. Those games aren't going to be near as desired compared to games like Fire Emblem Awakening, Pokemon Red, and the Minish Cap, games exclusive to handhelds. It's thanks to their accessibility and mobility that these consoles print money if they're successful. It's been a while since I've started this video. Let's see what the cheapest games look like now. Perhaps the Steam Deck will actually be the Switch killer it's posed to be. But until that time comes, I say, all hail Nintendo and their remedies for boring road trips. With that said, bye for now.